Esterházys had a huge castle at Eisenstadt, outside Vienna, where music played a remarkable role under the old conductor Gregorius Werner. The Esterházys were at the top of the Hungarian nobility and major patrons of the arts. At Esterházy were fine singers, an excellent orchestra, and a determination to have the best in music that money could buy. Haydn's remarkable contract with the prince gave him just the opportunity he needed, security and the finest material to work with. It was a remarkable chance for the young composer. He settled into the court at Esterházy, a place which he was hardly to leave except when the Esterházys went to Vienna for more than 30 years. Certainly, Haydn turned out much more than the Esterházys had hoped for. Prince Paul Anton died within 6 months of Haydn's appointment, to be replaced by an even more gifted and enthusiastic musician, Prince Nicholas. So Haydn worked for a man who was entirely in sympathy with him. Work, however, he certainly did. Aside from composing constantly, Haydn, who succeeded Werner upon the old man's death, had to administer the orchestra, the opera house which came to be built, conduct and rehearse the chapel choir, and generally keep all his musicians happy. He was admired and respected by his employers, however, who gained enormous prestige as his international reputation grew. This was the house he finally bought for himself. It was burned down twice when Haydn owned it, and each time it was rebuilt at the prince's expense, so his employer knew how to support his famous court musician. The only way the composer's music could spread was by being published widely, so he made agreements with at least 2 publishers in London, one in Paris and another in Berlin, and of course with Artaria in Vienna. He was always extremely careful with his business affairs, and although he was never rich, he was always comfortably off. Prince Nicholas was no slouch when it came to hard work himself. He owned a property in Hungary, where he decided to build a palace complete with theatres and gardens to rival the Empress herself at Schönbrunn. In the opera house at Esterházy, as it was called, Haydn's role as opera composer and director expanded dramatically. It is not as an opera composer that he is remembered today, and his operas on classical themes might be seen by us more as festival pieces, rather than the subtle play on character which his contemporary Mozart developed. Haydn always considered Mozart to be the greatest composer he knew, and he never ceased to say so. They were great friends, though Haydn was much the elder, and they played chamber music together whenever they had the chance. Haydn's life was not otherwise noted for its friendships. He enjoyed the company of his fellow musicians at Esterházy, but the relationship was professional. He was recognized as a kind and friendly man, but as a composer he worked on his own, setting the trends that others followed. His barren marriage meant he turned to other women. One was Luigia Ponizelli, a 19-year-old opera singer, pretty but untalented, who turned up with her aged violinist husband. Haydn became passionately involved with her. The prince continued to employ the couple just to keep Haydn happy. In later years, Haydn did much to help her children, one of whom some believed to be his own. was to extend throughout most of his life. The Esterhazy physician, Peter von Genzinger, had a musical wife, Maria Anna, for whom Haydn wrote a fine but difficult piano sonata. Perhaps Haydn was a little in love with Frau von Genzinger. Anyway, he wrote her many interesting letters, in which much is revealed of his character. Haydn's music became immensely popular throughout Europe. He seemed to write exactly what the world wanted, so it's not surprising that he received many invitations to work abroad. The Esterhazys would never let him go. They felt, perhaps with reason, that he would not return. In this grand hall in the palace, now called the Haydn, many of Haydn's works were played for the first time. In 1790, however, Prince Nicholas died, and his successor, not being an enthusiast for music, dismissed most of the musicians, leaving Haydn with a good pension and nothing to do. He went to England. Johann Peter Salomon was born in Bonn, and his family had even shared a house with the Beethoven family. He became an eminent violinist and was particularly successful in England with a series of subscription concerts. He invited Haydn to join them. Against Mozart's advice, who felt he might be too old for the experience, Haydn arrived in London without mishap, and was quite fascinated by the vastness and noise of the city and the vigour of its musical life. Haydn was very popular in England, and under the guidance of Salomon and Dr. Burney, England's reigning musical expert, his reputation was enhanced, and he wrote some of his finest work. The King and Queen invited him on several occasions, and he became a great friend of at least one nobleman, Lord Abingdon. But he also enjoyed the company of the large and informed middle classes, who were the bulk of his audiences. Haydn always seemed to attract pretty women, rather to his surprise, although he was certainly attracted to them. While in London, he was involved with a certain Rebecca Schroeter, the widow of a German pianist, Johann Schroeter, who had been master of the king's music. She was not young, but in his eyes still beautiful and charming. When he was not dining out, he dined with her. She certainly came to love him, and introduced him to her delightful circle of friends. He went to Oxford in July 1791 to receive a doctorate in music degree. There he was feted and enjoyed himself, and was impressed by the buildings. His wealthy friends invited him to stay in their peaceful country houses, like the home of Sir Charles Rich at Waverley Abbey in Surrey. He wrote of the ruins, "Whenever I looked at this beautiful wilderness, my heart was impressed that all this once belonged to my religion." At Roxford in Hertfordshire, he stayed in the grand house of a banker called Brassey, adjoining this farm. The big house is now gone, but over a peaceful few months here, he wrote symphonies 93, 94, and part of 98. His portrait was often painted. This fine painting by Hatdn is still in the Royal Collection, and has become the best-known picture of the composer. Haydn never aspired to be a gentleman. He was, after all, considered to be a servant by his employers, yet he had a dignity and style which carried him through. One of the most important experiences he had in England was hearing the oratorios of Handel. Although German, Handel had settled permanently in England. His oratorios made a huge impression on Haydn, and were to inspire him to write the great oratorios of his later years. In May 1791 there was a big Handel festival, and Haydn was present at a performance in Westminster Abbey. A choir of 1,000 voices sang the anthem Zadok the Priest, and Haydn was deeply moved. In the summer of 1792, Haydn left England and journeyed through Europe, meeting the young Beethoven on the way. Back home he was touched to find that a monument was being put up at his birthplace by Count Harrach, the Lord of Rohrau. It was first put on an island in the lake near the castle, but later moved to its present position outside the post office of Rohrau. The summer of 1793 he spent at Eisenstadt, taking his pupil Beethoven with him. He recognized the young man's immense talents, saying he would be proud to speak of himself as the teacher of Beethoven. Haydn purchased a little house at Gumpendorf, a suburb of Vienna, where he intended to retire. But meanwhile his work was far from over. In January 1794, with the Prince's permission, he set off for England again, where he was to enjoy more triumphs. He had new symphonies to perform. Back in Vienna, Prince Anton suddenly died and was replaced by yet another music lover. He wanted to restore the Esterházy orchestra and wanted Haydn back. In spite of his welcome in England and the money he was making there, it seemed too good a prospect to turn down. For the moment, however, he wanted to see more of England. He visited Bath, and in his remarkable English notebooks he recorded his impressions in detail. Once again he met the royal family and played and sang with the Queen. On May 4th a benefit concert was given for Haydn, bringing him more than 4,000 gulden, about 3 times his annual salary in Vienna. He left London in August and found that the Esterházy Palace had been abandoned, and his life was to centre on Vienna in the winter and Eisenstadt in summer.
Look at that palace, it's beautiful.
Here, at the Bergkirche in Eisenstadt, he gave the first performance of his last great masses, written to celebrate the birthdays of the Princess Esterházy. Admiral Lord Nelson, visiting the prince after the victory of the Battle of Aboukir over Napoleon's fleet, was in the audience in 1800, and his name is given to the mass of that year. But the greatest glories of these last years in Vienna were his oratorios, The Creation and The Seasons. With The Creation he scored the most spectacular success in its first public performance at the old university. In 1797, Haydn, impressed by the vitality and beauty of the English national anthem God Save the King, which people sang at every suitable occasion, wrote one for his own people. He called it Volkslied, the people's song, and it is the second movement of one of his finest quartets.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to stop and log into Hatdn Part 3, and you can see we're almost done. It's just going to be a real short snippet. So log into Hatdn Part 3.